time of year is an excellent time to think about what it means to finish a work, be it artwork, presentation, garment. And so I have prepared this slideshow for you, which is largely derived from a show that was at the Met Brewer. It was actually the very first show at the Met Brewer when the Met took over the Whitney space. And the exhibition examined unfinishedness as a quality when a work is left incomplete both by accident and also by intention. And this coincided, and I just mention it because it'll help give you a sense of when the exhibit occurred. This happened simultaneous to Kanye West releasing what seemed to me to be the 9th version of his album, The Life of Pablo, which made me begin to consider the idea of published iterations. It used to be that when you produced something and published it, whether it was music or artwork or a collection, that was finite. And I think that in terms of a cultural event really showed us that a working of a project or a concept, when it's released, it's where it is in a point in time, and it may be revisited. So this slideshow largely features eye candy from that show and some other additional examples, and I would like you to be thinking about how this applies to you in your own design practice, both in terms of your presentations and also your prototypes and your projects. So to begin with is a sample, and the show was really distinguished because I think in the past there was truly a separation between art from the past, from the Renaissance, ancient Egypt, the sort of thing you would find in the Met, to artwork that was considered modern, which is what the Whitney concerned itself with. But at the Met Brewer, this show really was comprehensive, went all the way back to the Renaissance and to contemporary art. So beginning with this work by Da Vinci, I think you can see that the degrees of finishedness in artwork are usually determined by the era, the culture, and the media in which something was produced. And unfinished art from the Renaissance actually seems quite modern, despite the patina of age. This is by Albrecht Dürer, and it's from 1505. This painting is circa 1500, and it has the appearance almost of a paint by numbers. This is Federico Barocci, and the year of the painting was 1612, and you can see that it's almost as if he was working from the top down, that there is a lot of articulation up there, not so much down here. It almost looks like 3D printing at the bottom. It's very, you can see that things were defined by plane, and even as far back as the Renaissance, Michelangelo coined the phrase non finito to describe incompletion as a deliberate act, and you can see even here such an aesthetic prompts the active engagement of the viewer. And that varying levels of completion can be used to suggest focus or depth of field, vitality, expression, emotion, and perhaps most importantly, a sense of balance and rhythm. And incompleteness can be used to suggest modernity and irony. This painting is attributed to Anton Raphael Mengs from 1775, and I think we can get a sense of what is sitting in her lap, even though it isn't defined. And I've always felt that this painting looked like modern art. It has a level of irony that almost suggests the overall aesthetic and feeling in a Jeff Koons painting. This is Gustav Klimt, and for those who are familiar with his work, we usually expect exhaustive surface design everywhere, and this is a window into process, and I actually find it a relief that there isn't quite so much detail throughout. This is Alberto Giacometti, who was quoted as saying, "The more one works on a picture, the more impossible it becomes to finish it." This is attributed to Delacroix, also a quote from him, where he said, "A work is spoilt a little in completion, revealing limitations and discrepancy between intention and end result." And I think that that's a pretty meaningful statement. And in my experience, when I see student work that is both underworked and overworked, I think it's the consequence of the discrepancy between the intention and the end result, that when you're working on a project, if you can see that it isn't going where you intended it to be, I could see where it would be very difficult to complete, and I could also see where one would keep working and working until you got it to reconcile the end result with your intention. And fortunately, digital means allow us, if we save as we go, to return to an earlier point in a project where perhaps it wasn't overworked. And that's truly a teachable moment for you, because you can realize in the future that maybe you should stop a little sooner. This is an early work by Picasso, and you can see that the face is certainly very articulated, but then as you go, it's almost as if he's working from the center out and with less detail. I'm actually not sure who the artist is here, but I think it's a good example of how it's almost as if it's a selective focus with a camera, and that we really can get a sense of the depth of field. This is by Whistler, and again, the incompleteness really suggests emotion, atmosphere. This one made me laugh out loud when I was at the museum at the time. It is a painting of Mary, Queen of Scots, and you will notice that what is missing is her head. More Picasso. Hard to tell whether this was intentional or he just didn't get around to finishing it. This one, I suspect, was intentional. You can see here, there's kind of an irony created because you have all of this hatchwork. And so even though the painting isn't fully rendered, we get a sense of the depth. This is by Lucian Freud, and I quite love this painting because it looks like somebody took a squeegee to a window to reveal, to a frosted window or dirty window, to reveal what was behind there, maybe even the subconscious, but it also gives us an inkling as to the order in which Lucian Freud works, where it begins and how he works outward. I think there's plenty told here. We don't need any more. This is by Kerry James Marshall. Again, irony, you can see that there is paint by numbers and that the intention was to leave it incomplete. Marlene Dumas, a lot is left to the interpretation by the viewer. This is Gerhard Richter, who is a personal favorite of mine, and what I find particularly interesting about Gerhard Richter is that he will create a work with great specificity, and then he will take a squeegee to it and create abstraction, blurriness, vagueness. And so for him, he kind of reverses the process, because normally we work from the abstract and the non-specific to the specific. This is a work of art called Lick and Lather, and it's two sculptures. The one on the left is made of chocolate, the one on the right is made of soap, and the thought is that whether one would eat the chocolate one or wash with the soap or add water to the one on the right, that they will become undone or unfinished, so that there is a reversal of time. This is Charles Birchfield, and you'll notice at the bottom it says that the work was done in the 1960s, and that's because Birchfield would work on a painting for 5 years, 10 years, coming back to it and often adding to the canvas. And I think you can imagine this even in designing. It really kind of coincides with our ideas of reincarnating garments and even reincarnating your own garments. This was not included in the show. These are just some examples that I think really illustrate the idea of balance. This is Egon Schiele, and Egon Schiele, really this is typical of all of his work, where there is a selective focus. It's usually the hands and face. I think this creates a point of view. In this instance, we really feel like she is seated and we're looking down on her, and the eye fills in. This is the work of Howard Tangi. He's a fashion illustrator, also teaches at Central St. Martin's. He's the main drawing tutor there, and he was very much and continues to be very much influenced by Egon Schiele and allows the eye to fill in. And I think you can see it here. This is a really good example where I don't think that our brains interpret this as an armless person, because the hands are there and the drawing is created in such a logical way that our mind fills in. And I would like you to think about the degree or even using unfinishedness in your projects as a quality rather than as an accident or a circumstance.